Hello and welcome back to another Berners Book Club podcast. My name is Tessa Hawes and I am the current graduate scholar here at Framlingham College. I'm joined here today with Sam Lebbon, our head of biology, and some of our A-level biology students, Holly, Emily and Dušan. And today we will be discussing The Invention of Nature by Andrea Wulf. We will be taking a key focus on the prologue, chapter 4, which explores the South American environment, and chapter 17, where we get into a bit more of about evolution and Darwin. So Wulf wrote The Invention of Nature in 2017, and it is a historical non-fiction book which is now available in the Berners Library if you want to read it. And it explores the naturalist and geographer Humboldt as he journeys across the New World. So without further ado, let's dive into the prologue. So what ideas does the prologue establish for the rest of the book?
So the prologue starts by speaking about Humboldt's beginnings and his life, that actually he had a really privileged upbringing and he was provided with a lot of educational opportunities, but he went down a completely different route to that which he was perhaps being directed towards, and that was because of his natural curiosity. And it's that curiosity which is something that's really, really important for us all to have and all to make the most of. And just purely by having that, he was able to be a truly exceptional scientist and have a lasting impact on so many different things. It talks in places about the significance he's had around the world and in multiple different areas of science. So it sets that scene about his thought process, his ability to connect different topics as well. And yeah, he really was the front of the book titles him as the lost hero of science, and it does set that for us.
Yeah, I kind of liked the start where it said that Humboldt viewed species not through sort of narrow types of classification, but more broadly. And I think that kind of sets the tone for the rest of the novel.
Yeah, I agree. I think one thing I'd noticed when I was reading it is he kind of did talk a lot about how emotion played a big kind of part in his journey. And I think most people think science is quite a no emotion, black and white. But actually, his passion is what inspired other people to explore as well, which I think is really important for the rest of the book.
I agree.
Well, I can also agree, and I have to admit that he was really different for his time. Compared to other naturalists and zoologists, he truly wanted to explore the world and did not just view it from one perspective, he viewed it from many others. So when he climbed the mountain near its summit, when it all cleared out and saw the view of South America, he just saw how different everything was, just the entire perspective. And
one thing that he did was he was able to look through things in a different view to us. It's really hard for us to now consider the viewpoint that he had, because we know how big the world is, we know about the different continents, we know about different species, but at the time you've got to remember that he didn't have any knowledge of that. And so he was perhaps the first human to set foot on some of these islands that he went to, and yet he was still able to remember an island he'd been to 10, 15 years previously and compare. He was really quite remarkable.
Yeah, and he kind of made it his mission to document every single species that he encountered. And I think that's hard for us to fathom, that, when we walk outside today and we just see some daisies, how that's just kind of evident to us, and, that we just look at that. But because he was the first person to step foot on some of these new countries or places, he would be the first person to look at a daisy or whatever species is native to that country and document it, which I think is pretty cool.
And I love that he actually continued his explorations and his ventures to his 60s, maybe 70s in his life, which is incredible. And he was actually ahead of many other adventurists in those same expeditions, but far younger than him.
Yeah, it's on. He's an amazing figure. So if we move on to chapter 4 and we talk about South America, how did Humboldt's South American journey shape his view on nature?
He really started to look at how interconnected nature was, whereas his predecessors saw everything as individual units. And yeah, this really impacted. So he's also looked at the kind of human influence on nature, how that was all connected as well.
So something that I found interesting is when he went to Lake Valencia and he saw that had a unique ecosystem, and with that he linked the human influence on climate change and the human influence, as you said, Emily, on sort of biodiversity and climate. What are our thoughts on that? What are our thoughts on the influence between climate and human influence or impact?
I think it's really interesting how we think climate change is a new discovery, but actually Humboldt had discovered this and seen this many years ago, and yet it's still a problem today. And I think this kind of just emphasizes how we need to listen to the science and actually do more about it.
But also that, someone with not a lot of equipment was able to quite simply see, okay, so we've got an area of forest that hasn't had any human interaction with it, and then we've got an area of forest that's had human management and where we've drawn resources from the land, and then the negative effect that that's had on it for quite a few years to come. It doesn't take someone that was a genius like Humboldt was to see that today, and yet there's still people and countries and corporations that I think it's more they now make a choice not to believe it for selfish reasons, whereas this does prove that we've been aware of this for some time now, and we really just need to get our act together and go, right, now the world, the ecosystems that surround us both in this country and beyond are more important than just us. And I think he had that view. I think we have that view, but that's why education is so important, because then if we realise the importance of life, then hopefully people will respect it more.
And I love his perspective in general of ecosystems as a bunch of intertwined webs and threads that even if one falls apart, the others will follow.
Yeah, so in this sense, he is kind of the father of the environmental movement. I've kind of noticed in the novel myself that, something that kind of hit me was that Humboldt was the first to explain the fundamental functions of the forest for the ecosystem and climate. So the fact that the trees have the ability to store water and protect the soil and have a cooling effect and release oxygen, and how that very much influences the rises of sea levels and how the trees are consequential to the world around him. So what important discoveries in this chapter did you personally think impacts environmental science today?
I think it was really interesting how a lot of other scientists at the time were almost twisting what they saw to kind of fit in with religion at the time. So a lot of their ideas were about how God created land for humans to use and destroy. But he was actually seeing that we were having a negative impact, and he didn't just he wasn't afraid to go against the views of the time, even if that was going against religion. I think that was really interesting and inspiring, because we should not be afraid to do the same thing today.
Yeah, he was a pioneer to go against the grain like that. Yeah,
and the thing is, that entire theme was happening for thousands of years. Aristotle was the first one to start that, and just mentioned that the earth was made for man to conquer and to use. Yeah. And many others followed after Aristotle. And it's fascinating that he was among the first, if not the first one, to actually break away from that tradition and habit.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So to move along with that, once we look at chapter 17 and the evolution in nature, we kind of see Darwin's interpretation and kind of movement away from believing that God created every species. So my kind of question to you guys is, how did Humboldt's ideas shape Darwin's thinking on evolution?
Humboldt was very central to all of Darwin's. Like, Darwin himself says how much he loved all of his work and how much he copied, really, in his own work. And I think it's really interesting how we chose to, I mean, it did take some time, but how we chose to accept Darwin's theory and Humboldt's forgotten, really. Yeah, and why that is. Yeah, it makes me feel almost guilty that, like, I didn't know who he was, but yeah, I think it's really interesting.
I guess that's why this book is so important, because everyone remembers Darwin. I mean, I have to be honest, before Mr. Lebbon suggested this book to me, I didn't really know who Humboldt was. So, and he's crucial. He's the backbone to Darwin's thinking. Darwin kind of hopped on the Beagle, I think it was, his boat across the world, in kind of a replication of Humboldt, to say, oh, look, I can go across the globe as well. And I think it's important how both of them mirror each other. When they go across the globe and when they collect their observations of different species, and how it's kind of how they both observe what's around them and take it in. But yeah, it's similar how they both did that, I think. So if we think about the kind of duality of Humboldt and Darwin, we can see that Humboldt informed Darwin's understanding of nature as an ecological system, and this understanding of the world telescopically and microscopically simultaneously. So what key kind of moment did you take from this chapter about Darwin's realization of evolution and wanting to sort of make that apparent? I kind of thought about the evolution of species from the Galapagos Islands with the birds. Did anybody have any thoughts on what happened there?
I think it was like partly down because Humboldt was known for his meticulous research and observations, and that Darwin really echoed this. And perhaps without it, Darwin wouldn't have noticed the differences in all the finches. So it shows how central Humboldt was.
You know, you're right about that methodical nature that Humboldt had of looking at everything at the time. And we cover this in the A-level biology specification a little bit. There was a focus of classification that we will look at the things that we sort of know about, and so we can classify animals, we can classify plants, but he looked into it more than that. He saw this interconnectedness, but also an organism that's similar in South America to one that's found in Derbyshire, and the connections there. And I think because he'd given Darwin that idea, that prompted him to look, so this finch is similar to the one on Galapagos and in Ecuador, and how might that have happened? And he probably did actually set the scene for that theory to come about.
Yeah, I wrote down here about how Humboldt had written about the, quote, gradual transformations of species, and that's the idea that, you know, that fixed species are wrong, and yeah, Darwin agreed with that. So with that being said, Darwin kind of drew away, as we were speaking about before, drew away from the idea that God created individual species. And with that, you know, if the earth is constantly changing, if land and sea can move, if temperatures can cool and rise, and that means that organisms must be able to change as well, and there isn't this fixed principle, which is cool. So to conclude from this book, I'm just going to ask a question to the floor. Why is it important to consider Humboldt's discoveries in today's world?
Well, we can learn a lot from everything he just said and everything he mentioned. Every single observation that he made was somewhat relevant, and thankfully still is, in today's world. From deforestation to climate change to movement of tectonic plates, if I remember correctly. Just all of these things, we need to really just concentrate on those and maybe just take a moment and actually appreciate how important Humboldt actually is.
That curiosity that he had, I think, is a really important message for our Framlingham pupils, really, to hear that, you know, he had a good start to life, as we say. He had it set for him. He could very easily have gone into finance, and he could have lived a very nice, comfortable life with lots of money. But he chose instead to pursue his passion, and he chose to go against the grain a little bit and ask questions and be curious and travel and experience things. And he was constantly learning. And that is a philosophy that I think really should be admired, and should be one that others go, do you know what an amazing thing to do. Let's keep on learning. It's not just GCSEs and A-levels and university. It's learn about the world, about everything that is available to us. And okay, so we've got new technologies coming around. We've got AI. Let's look into that more. How could that help us with bioinformatics and learning about the genes that make up you and I? Because whilst it's easy to read this and think, oh, well, all of the fun stuff is being discovered, it absolutely has not. You know, I'm doing a project in the summer in Cambridge about the proteins that are present in different cancers, and what we can do to use those proteins to identify cancers early and cure cancers early and stop the spread of cancers. And that is something that's going to be vitally important for many, many years to come. So there is a lot still to discover, whether you're an A-level biologist or not. And, you know, just be curious.
I completely agree, sir. And I can't remember who said this quote, but the more you learn, the more you realize how little you know. And that's what we should strive to, just keep on expanding and just keep on just pushing forward, just for the sake of doing it.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much for joining me on this podcast today. It was great fun to do, and also if you want to read The Invention of Nature, it is available in the library. So yeah, thank you very much.